Welcome to another episode of Catalyzing Radical Systemic Change, where it's all about discovering, mapping, and cross-pollinating what I think are the necessary building blocks towards a planetary civilization ahead. And in today's topic, we're going to dive deep into the weed of Web3 technology and the regenerative renaissance. And besides just them being funny new buzzwords and hashtags, I'm really curious to listen into with Stephen Reid. I would describe him from the outside as a social entrepreneur and also typology of an activist in the space since quite a while. So my first question for the two of us today here in this virtual room together is, Stephen, when you look back in your biography, we usually have this 2 or 3 or maybe 5 pivotal moments. And if you could highlight them and ideally also link them back to the topic.
Okay, thanks, Alistair. Well, it's good to be here. So if I think of some of the key turning points in my life, the first would be the deaths of both of my parents within 3 months of each other from unrelated causes when I was 20 years old, which felt like a real wake-up call. Like up to that point, my life had been pretty smooth. You know, I'd gone to the right school and got into the right university, and everything was kind of proceeding as I was told life should. And then it was like, wow, okay, like, you know, tragedies can happen, and life isn't always just as we're told it's going to be. So that led me to think deeply about the meaning of life, how I wanted to live my life. I actually got to the second round of an interview with a hedge fund when I was completing my degree in physics at Oxford University, and at the last minute decided to do a master's in complexity sciences instead. And then I had funding to continue that master's to a PhD level, but again at the last minute decided no, PhD is not for me right now, and threw myself into the world of climate activism. I've been taught about climate physics, climate change during, well, actually my physics degree and to some extent the complexity science masters as well. I was like, this sounds really bad. Like, why is no one doing anything about this? And at that point, I took it on myself to see what I could do, what I could contribute, learn, or quite quickly came to the idea that it's a lot about the economy, and if we're going to make any progress on the climate crisis, we're going to have a radically different economic system. Started working for an economics think tank, and then the next, so that economic realization, I guess, was a pretty important turning point. But the next major one, I guess, was discovering psychedelics whilst I was working for this think tank, and then having another shift, thinking, oh well, maybe it isn't all about the economy. Maybe it's about our inner worlds, our inner change. Like, how do we need to change as people to create this sustainable, this regenerative economy? So psychedelics was also my route into meditation and breath work, and actually integral metamodern thought in some way. And then the last turning point I'll mention is at the point at which I turned the Psychedelic Society with my colleagues into a not-for-profit worker cooperative. Got me thinking a lot about ownership and new forms of ownership. And I'd been aware of the blockchain Web3 space for a while at that point, but I realized there was some really interesting and exciting to me parallels between co-ops and DAOs. So it was through actually being involved in a co-op myself that I then had this renewed interest in DAOs. And then for the past few years, it turns out that's actually been the main space professionally. I've been teaching courses on Web3, blockchain, decentralized finance, regenerative finance. I'm also working as a coach and a Ruby developer for a platform for events and co-created gatherings. So there you go. I hope that wasn't too long.
Yeah. I have the feeling I want to open up the rabbit hole separately, and maybe towards the end of the conversation get a little bit to, you know, the psychedelic piece. Today, really, it's mainly for me about the Web3 and blockchain space. So I give you my own outlook. So I would not consider myself an expert in the field, more a layman, but somebody that read, I don't know, maybe some 50 to 100 articles to understand like just the base level of blockchain technology. And then I would not say fully immersed myself, but for me as an outsider, often it feels like I don't see the forest for the trees. So when I look from the outside at Web3 and blockchain, my main interest is always like, okay, what are the defining parameters, so to say, that make these technology actually an enabler for what I would call, yeah, the regenerative economy or game B or something like that. And I personally perceive a lot of the endeavors actually just hijacking the technology, and a lot of people got like insanely rich, many of them already with deep pockets before. So instead of us focusing too much, you know, on this, like pointing the finger towards those endeavors that we do not want to support, but brackets, I would also, you know, like to have you at least spend a minute or two or five on that, and more highlights. So for a layman audience, what actually is the revolutionary potential of these technologies, and where do we see applications already at play that are more than just like ideas or concepts? So actually people are really starting to organize in a different way. Ownership is distributed in a different way. Also, the exchange of value is attributed in a different way. So I know this doesn't come quite exactly as like one question, but maybe as a start for our conversation today. Yeah, so curious to listen in from your side.
Mm-hmm. So maybe let's start with just the what I consider to be the fundamental or foundational benefits of blockchain technology. The first is censorship resistance. So no one and no government, no entity, no matter how like rich and powerful they are, can unilaterally like pull the plug on the Bitcoin blockchain or the Ethereum blockchain or other major blockchains. The blockchain exists as a decentralized ledger stored on computers across the world. Such the only way you could like kind of stop Bitcoin is really to like stop the internet at this point, which is, well, we can debate how feasible that is, you know, but that's the kind of level of resilience that that these systems have, which to me is very interesting as someone who's always had like left libertarian politics. The possibility of having a data structure actually, well, and most commonly used as a ledger to record transactions and in the form of cryptocurrency that is beyond the reaches of the nation state is a very exciting possibility. Now of course it depends, like what exactly do we do with this technology. There's plenty of like kind of hardcore right libertarians in the space that I would disagree with on a number of like really important points, but there's no doubt in my mind that it is a liberatory technology so far, you know, with at least relative to fiat currency money issued by the state that we're used to. And I mentioned the word in passing, but the other major advantage is resilience. This the Bitcoin and Ethereum have never gone down we've seen how actually, even Facebook and Twitter and Google occasionally have outages, and actually just how incredibly disruptive that can be in the modern world. Certainly how disruptive it would be if any of those major services were down for an extended period of time, because we rely, you just take it for granted that you can pull out your phone and Google Maps is like just there and it just works. So the idea that we've now constructed a type of cryptographic system that is so far has had no downtime, I think is another really interesting just thing to note, thing to play with. And again, I think that you could do good or evil with technology with of this type, of this censorship resistant resilient type, but there's no doubt in my mind that it is very significant advance in several fields: computer science, economics, and what happens now really depends on which humans are attracted towards it and use the technology for the good of people and the planet.
I don't feel like challenging the assumption. It's more like if I consciously take, the position of the critics, then it's like, what it's all worth for, what is actually really changing the nature of the game. When I personally look just at Bitcoin, despite obviously, the huge amount of energy that it, consumes. And I know this can be solved, but I know this is still a tricky issue also with the Ethereum blockchain. Let's stay a little bit, for a couple of moments on the problem side of things. And I would like you to, just take your very personal opinion where you see the whole market. It's still a very new technology. So it's a little bit like, I feel like with blockchain, we're in like, I don't know, 1995, early stages, Mosaic browser, Web 1.0, I mean, it's still very nascent. And maybe instead of you simply, putting the finger and saying, okay, this are the problems, then also come towards the pieces that really give you hope, that inspire you. I mean, you're deeply immersed into the field.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned it there briefly again. And I think this is actually a really interesting topic, the energy uses of Bitcoin. Right? There's a lot of activities in society that I think are bullshit and shouldn't happen. Like the one I came across most recently in this context was just Las Vegas, right? Like it's just this giant casino in the middle of the desert that uses huge amounts of energy. I think one of the most energy hungry cities in the United States. Do I think that's a valuable thing to exist in the context of the climate crisis? No, but other people do, and at the moment they're choosing, whether I like it or not, to kind of spend money keeping the whole thing afloat. And the same is true of Bitcoin. Some people see the value in Bitcoin. Some people think this is useless, but people are spending their money to keep the thing going. So this idea of Bitcoin uses loads of energy. It's well, yeah, but lots of things use loads of energy. Yeah, we don't no one is seriously suggesting that we pull the plug on Las Vegas or pick whatever other city or project that you don't like. So I think that the more interesting question is why are people spending money on Bitcoin, or willing to kind of offset the inflationary schedule of Bitcoin to keep the network going. I think the answer to that lies in one of the points I said before, is censorship resistance, or another phrase that we could use here is freedom of speech. If we accept that Bitcoin's key characteristic is its censorship resistance, it's the fact it's a money outside of the state, I would suggest that fundamentally the utility and people's interest in Bitcoin is proportional to the extent to which that people deem it necessary to have a money outside of the state. If people had a very high degree of trust in nation states and the fiat money that they issue, probably Bitcoin wouldn't be a thing. No one would be interested in it. People are interested in it because there is this crisis of trust in nation states and how they're running economies and the kinds of projects that they continue to fund and subsidize, for example, fossil fuels, and the kinds of things they don't. For example, renewable energy technologies that could take us closer to net zero and a regenerative economy.
I have then the feeling it makes sense to. I know some bits and pieces of the tapestry. But maybe then we educate a little bit the audience over the next couple of minutes. So starting with Bitcoin to other blockchain, let's say like Ethereum, and then down to the application level. What happened in the last years, and where is this like nascent technology standing at the moment when you compare it to normal applications? Let's say people are using WhatsApp or Signal, or they're logging onto Facebook. What is the functionality really providing?
Yeah. So Bitcoin was the first example of a functional, or if you'd like the technical term, Byzantine fault-tolerant distributed ledger. It turns out like creating a distributed ledger that is like a record of who has sent how much to who else in a distributed way. It's actually quite a difficult computer science problem, and that was that. And the fact that Satoshi Nakamoto, the anonymous inventor of Bitcoin, wrote the Bitcoin white paper and presented a solution to that the Byzantine generals problem in 2009 was a very significant like discovery or invention, depending on how you look at invention. Then at that point, and largely still, Bitcoin is pretty dumb. It just records like A sent this many coins to B sent this many coins to C, and so on across time. But the next major innovation in the space was with arguably Ethereum, which was allowed for smart contracts. So these are basically just small programs that run on the blockchain. So as well as having this record of who sent money to who and how many coins each other has, the Ethereum blockchain and other smart contract chains actually enable computation. In fact, general computation. Ethereum is Turing complete, so you can any program that can be run in principle can be run on the Ethereum blockchain. So although it's very slow, it's like it's not like you're not restricted in the kinds of computation that you can do on Ethereum. And this turned out to be a really good idea to allow computations to run on blockchains, and now basically every major certainly new blockchain and blockchain launched over the past few years has some kind of smart contract capability. And the smart contracts really came to the fore in probably 2019 in a big way with the advent of DeFi, decentralized finance, where people realized that you could kind of like rewrite a great number of functions of the traditional finance sector, like lending, borrowing, even more exotic stuff like options and derivatives, like as smart contracts running on. Typically, the Ethereum blockchain can be other blockchains as well. So this was, a lot of this stuff. Does it even need to exist? You could say, like, it's of course, like, there's a lot of problems with the traditional finance industry. I don't think it's necessarily a useful thing to just like recreate it en masse on the blockchain in a censorship-resistant way. However, it was a great way of just bootstrapping the developer community. There's now a lot of talented developers that now know Solidity, like the Ethereum smart contracting language and other similar languages. The talent pool now exists, in my mind, to then turn the talent towards much more interesting and important problems. So in the last year or so, we've seen the birth of the so-called refi movement, not decentralized finance, but refi, regenerative finance. And this is kind of stands on the shoulders of DeFi, is using a lot of the hard work that many DeFi developers did, and at least certainly kind of cultural growth that occurred around that period of time, and is now saying, okay, well, how can we use this to regenerate land and water, and help solve the climate crisis, and help provide for better lives for people, and that's what I've always been excited about in entering this space. Or one of the two things I've been most excited about in entering this space: the potential for this technology to make a contribution to some of those issues. And if you say that we're early in the blockchain space, we're certainly very early in the refi space. But there, still, I will happily go on to mention, if you like, some examples of refi projects.
Oh, please, because I have the feeling I need somebody leading me through magic wonderland. So instead of staying purely, let's say, on the metaphorical level or the conceptual level, I'm really curious to you pick a couple of examples and also highlight where they are standing, even when it's early stage. And specifically try to combine this, like where you see, let's say, action on the ground, people behaving differently, projects being developed differently, let's say in the material world, but also what this has to do actually with the conceptual level that is only enabled through these new technologies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the first project that I can mention is Regen Network, which is a Cosmos-based chain. So not Ethereum, but this is a decentralized system of ecological credits, and there are two sides to Regen Network in a way. On one hand, you have actual landowners that are keen to regenerate their land, or keen to be rewarded for regenerating their land. So Regen Network work with landowners using a combination of both on the ground and satellite sensing technology. They first establish a baseline level of ecological health of the land, and then track how well the landowner is regenerating the land over time. And the landowner is then rewarded in these regen credits, these regen tokens, according to how well they are regenerating that land. On the other side of the equation, you have people interested in purchasing these regen credits, were essentially proof of regeneration, and this is often big corporations. So Microsoft was the first early big buyer of regen credits, but in time it could be a much more diverse group of buyers, and so a lot of these corporations have actually have pretty strong ecological targets, certainly climate targets, to be net zero by 2030, sometimes even sooner, I think, in the case of some companies. And to the extent to which it's not yet possible to go fully zero carbon in their operations, they basically committed themselves to purchasing ecological credits and carbon credits. And Regen Network gives them the possibility of buying them kind of direct from, in a more direct way, from the people regenerating the land, cutting out the middlemen, and all the while it being a system that's completely transparent and auditable by anyone who cares to pay attention. Now, this is I'm not by any means an expert in the field of ecological credits and carbon trading schemes and so on, but my sense is there has been some serious criticism of at least the EU emission trading scheme, the main EU system for carbon trading, and it is my understanding that the Regen Network team feel like it will be a better alternative to these state or kind of EU isn't the state exactly, but yeah, these kind of multi-state run schemes for issuing carbon and other ecological credits.
So my question, even if you said you're not an expert in that specifically, I mean, just mentioning the name of Microsoft, I mean, this is not an entity that's interested, you know, to purchase tokens for, let's say, $50,000. Have you any idea of the size of this project, where it is standing?
How much of the value of tokens that Microsoft purchased, you mean? Or?
Maybe not specifically exactly the value of tokens Microsoft purchased, but more overall, like how big the network is.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I can tell you, again, it's very early days, but I can tell you, I mean, the current market capitalization of Regen Network is $36 million. So it's that would, I mean, it wouldn't, I don't think that would put it in like the sort of S&P 500 even, but like kind of moving in that direction, perhaps, based largely on people's hope that this could actually be a really important and useful intervention in the ecological crisis.
Okay, let's park that for a moment. I think for the sake of the endeavor of understanding that there are like alternatives for, let's say, carbon offsetting, because it will take a while up until we move all to like net zero or even beyond net zero into regeneration. What are other projects that give you hope?
So another project that I really like that has not been without a little bit of controversy in recent weeks, actually, but we can come to that later if we want to, is the Proof of Humanity's Universal Basic Income. So the Proof of Humanity part of this is that anyone can go to the Proof of Humanity site and submit a short video of themselves reading out their Ethereum address, along with some other short amount of text, and submit that video to this open registry of humans, which is anyone else can then has an opportunity to challenge that video for like a 3-day window if they think that it's not actually a human in the video, or maybe they've previously registered, or there's something else funny going on. But if no one challenges the application for a few days, I think there's also actually a deposit you have to pay. Then you enter the Proof of Humanity registry as an authenticated human being. And then the UBI, the Universal Basic Income part of that, is then from the point at which you are registered on the Proof of Humanity registry, you start receiving UBI tokens at a rate of 1 per hour. And so I think there's now something of the order of like 20,000-30,000 registered humans in the Proof of Humanity registry. All receiving these UBI tokens. Now, of course, then the important question is like, what, if anything, gives the UBI token value? And the answer to that is currently 2 sources. Firstly, there have been some philanthropists that have seen fit to purchase large amounts of this UBI token, as the kinds of people I sense that are interested just in experimenting of different ways of delivering a global universal basic income, and saying, like, hey, how about this? And so that's created this buy pressure of people actually wanting to, on the other side, people wanting, of course, to sell their UBI tokens into dollars or pounds or whatever it might be. And there's also UBI have encouraged people that are already engaged in the DeFi space, that are earning interest on various major crypto tokens, to deposit those tokens in UBI vaults, like UBI savings accounts, and then UBI takes a share of the interest. So, if you would normally be earning 20% if you put it directly on Yearn, but if you put it in the UBI vault, maybe you get 18%, and 2% goes directly to like buying and these UBI tokens. So they're both altruistic endeavors at this point, which to give the UBI token value. I think this is a super interesting project, well, I've been interested in the possibility of a universal basic income for a long time. And one of the big challenges with it is, if you just issue a UBI in any given jurisdiction, there's a great incentive for people to try to like move to that place to kind of claim the universal basic income. And so one good way of solving that is if there was just a scheme that was global straight off. So then there was no like pressure or incentive for people to try and like to move to one country to kind of game it in some way. And of course, the Ethereum ledger, other blockchain ledgers are global by default. So in that sense, it has the right kind of smell for a project like this. But of course, actually giving it the sustaining the value of the UBI token is a big, huge challenge. That the dream, as I've heard some people articulate, is like, one day, what if this UBI token was like the primary currency for the globe, for the world, a currency which is issued at a rate of 1 token per hour per human. So if like what would it take for that currency to actually become like the new reserve currency, taking the place of the US dollar? Well, first, of course, like we would need most, if not, like a great fraction of the world's population actually signed up and actually receiving it. Then we would need people to essentially like opt in, say, yeah, I actually think this is a fairer way for currency to be issued. And to my mind, like I find it's of course it's very simple, but I think it's very beautiful as well. The idea that like just every human just gets 1 token per hour, and that's how new money is created in our world, has a real appeal to me. So yeah, the proof of humanity UBI is just one of a bunch of different UBI experiments going on the blockchain yet. But it was one of the original ones, and I'm still attracted to its simplicity.
Let's stay a little bit on that magic wonderland, let's say, level of our conversation. Besides different experiments running on UBI, what are other interesting experiments on the stage, on the stage that you would like to highlight? Because then, I also would like to satisfy, if possible, those listeners who see things in a more like, let's say, I mean, ultimately I know UBI is super mundane, but I feel more like coming to like practicalities, because what is very interesting, even now that we see the market is going down, actually a ton of money has been flowing into the Web3 space, and a lot of things are basically almost on a weekly basis like discovered and coded that did not really exist ever before. So it's almost as if like new code, right, also in terms of like social architecture, is suddenly made possible through different blockchain applications. But again, maybe before we pull it more down to a practical application level, what are other like exciting experiments that you see happening in the space?
So I'm very enthusiastic about everything that's going on with DAOs, so distributed autonomous organizations or decentralized autonomous organizations. At least for people that have some familiarity with co-ops, then one of my best ways into describing DAOs is to say they are like super scalable, global by default, multi-stakeholder cooperatives. So can I unpack that a little bit?
Please, not only a little bit.
Okay. Let's start with the idea of a worker cooperative. So this is a business like the one that I work for, actually, Dandelion Collective, which is owned and run by its worker members. You then have multi-stakeholder cooperatives. So these would be organizations that are owned and run not just by the workers, but also by the customers, and perhaps also to some extent investors. So in multi-stakeholder cooperatives, you would have two classes of share. Usually you'd have voting rights and economic rights. So the voting rights determine who gets to actually take decisions on behalf of the organization, and the economic rights determine if and when the organization makes money, who sees the benefit of that. So in multi-stakeholder cooperatives, although you do have, you might have investors, the investors would typically only hold economic rights and hold no, or at least like a very limited share of the voting rights. So it's like, we're like, in multi-stakeholder cooperatives, investors are told, we're happy to take your money if this organization makes money. Of course, you'll see some return from that, but you're not, just because you put in 50% of the capital into this business, it does not mean you're getting 50% of the votes. Like the voting, the decision making still remains with largely the workers and the customers. So the best known DAO platform that has this separation between voting and economic rights is DAO House. Or once upon a time it was called Moloch, or you could say that DAO House is based on Moloch. And there's actually a new version of DAO House coming out pretty soon, I think, which I'm very excited to see. But so it enables something like this multi-stakeholder co-op on the blockchain. Now, what would be the advantages of running a multi-stakeholder cooperative on the blockchain? I'll just actually put up some of my notes from this course just so I can do the best job at this. Well, so firstly, minimal startup costs. I mean, generally, at least in the UK, co-ops aren't so expensive to start up. But to start a DAO, literally, if certainly you're doing it on one of the Ethereum layer 2s or side chains, it can just be pennies to start and more or less instantaneous as well. Similarly, there's minimal entry and exit costs for participants. It's not like, I think Germany has a bit of a reputation for having lots of paperwork around these kind of things, right? To become a member of the DAO, again, is just like a few clicks. You don't have to deal with loads of forms or going to an office in person and prove you're, there's full transparency. So the full history of who's a member of this DAO, what money has come in, what money has gone out, what decisions has the DAO made, is transparent by default. It's there, recorded on the Ethereum or similar blockchain. DAOs inherit the property of censorship resistance. No one, even in principle, can alter the decision of a DAO or the history of decisions of a DAO by inheriting this more fundamental property of censorship resistance that's common to all major blockchains. DAOs are global by default, borderless. Again, kind of inheriting that property from blockchains, and as someone who's kind of looked into running a cooperative across borders, it's like a pain in the ass, right? So the idea that we have these cooperative-like structures, which are just boom, you get that kind of for free, is very interesting. And I also mentioned that so many of the DAOs key policies with regards to how you become a member, how you leave, if you leave, what rewards do you get, what benefit, do you get any to take any of the profits the DAOs previously made with you? How do we vote on things, what's the quorum, what's the voting period? Those are all encoded as smart contracts, and in that sense, I would say they are crystal clear. They're even clearer than written documents. I mean, you can do a pretty good job if you're writing it, especially if you're writing in kind of legalese, when you're describing this is how this organization votes and this is how you become a member and so on. But when it's for me, at least, when it's actually written in code, it's even more precise. No one can kind of argue with, okay, with, oh, but I thought this word meant that, or I thought when you said this, you meant this other thing. The code takes some of that ambiguity out most of the time. So there you go. There's like, I think I just mentioned 6 areas where I think DAOs have advantages over traditional multi-stakeholder cooperatives. And I'm enthusiastic about both. I'm very enthusiastic about co-ops, and I'm also enthusiastic about potential for DAOs to, at least for some types of organization, particularly these like globally focused organizations, to actually be a better alternative in time, at least.
I wonder then if it's the right time in our conversation to really go into the weeds of sketching your own endeavor, like Dandelion. How do you organize it? I mean, you did invest a lot in that. It's a cooperative, but what strengths and weaknesses and pitfalls have you seen in the adoption, and how the other members using it? What worked? What did not work? What where were workarounds that people were using? So yeah, super curious.
So what's now Dandelion Collective started as the Psychedelic Society. Formerly, it was a company, Psychedelics UK Limited, company limited by guarantee, registered in the UK. And then at the beginning of 2020, when there were already about 8 of us working on the project, we just collectively decided to turn it into a not-for-profit worker cooperative. And at the same time, we changed the name to Dandelion Collective Limited. So Dandelion Collective Limited now has, I think it's now 9 members, and it's a worker cooperative. So every member has the same rights and responsibilities over the smooth and effective functioning of the organization. I think probably you've had a taste of being involved in some of these like non-hierarchical organizing or organizations rather, and when they work, they're wonderful, and when they don't, it can be really difficult because there's no hierarchy, there's no boss to just bang people's heads together and say like just get on with it, or you're fired, or in some case I've learned a great deal. We've learned a great deal about conflict and conflict resolution, because people do have disagreements, like sometimes like very deeply held and important disagreements, and to be able to navigate those with grace, and to see that and in good faith, and see to understanding there very well could be some important synthesis of positions on the other side, in my experience, has been key to the smooth functioning of a worker cooperative such as Dandelion Collective. So we invest a lot of time in getting on, we start all of our meetings with a check-in that takes as long as it needs to take. We spend great care to encourage people to do longer monthly check-ins with one another, and to seek to resolve conflict at the earliest possible opportunity. Like, don't let it fester. Like if you're feeling, she said something that meeting that kind of pissed me off, or didn't feel right, say that as soon as possible, because otherwise it might involve a much more lengthy and intense and potentially expensive conflict resolution process down the line if it kind of grows into something else. So and I love it. I love working in this kind of organization that really has this focus on relationships as the bedrock for all that we do.
I want to move the conversation slightly. So when I look at the people in my network that I know are doing everything to the best of their capabilities to make a difference, then I see some people, I would call it for the lack of a better word, somewhat like the permaculture cohort, many of which are rather adverse to technology And then there are those who really think, yeah, Web3 and the advent of blockchain technology, this will really make a big difference. So I wonder, like, when we combine our wish for a regenerative economy and Web3 technology, where is really, where is the magic taking place? I know, okay, I have this example, of the experiment of UBI. I hear you are still, working, but also still early stages experimenting with it. I get the example of the land registry. What are other endeavors where you think without Web3, right, it would be an impossible undertaking? So I want to focus on those bold endeavors where, like, large scale, maybe even ultra large scale, land restoration or other projects, like, basically need the layer of technology to be really successful.
Yeah, I think I think the way that you ask the question is actually interesting, and it's useful for us to go into that, because I'm not, I don't think, I'm not claiming that there's anything necessarily that that can't be done without Web3. I do think Web3 technology often enables certain projects and types of projects to happen at a speed and scale that we couldn't really have imagined previously. So the analogy I like here is letters to email. Like, the world did function just fine before email. We wrote letters to one another, and then then telegrams came along, and we could send telegrams to one another. And you can actually find articles in newspapers sort of in the early 90s being like, email, what is this ridiculous email thing? Like, why would we use email when we can send a letter? And on one level, it's true. It's like we already had a way of communicating via text to one another. It just took sometimes a few weeks if you needed it to get to the other side of the world. You could actually say, possibly some people would say, well, that was a much nicer world. Like, I wish we could go back to a time before email. So there's another conversation perhaps, but email did come along, and it wasn't the fact that you could never do anything like that before. It was what made it change the world is that it was 100,000x faster and cheaper than what came before. And that's I think a better way of thinking about Web3 technology for the most part. So the one case where actually you could say maybe that it is a little bit different is in the case of censorship resistance. If in the context of a very authoritarian state, then actually in that context, like, a censorship resistant technology is more of a kind of 0 to 1 thing. It's like either you can privately transact and send messages to people in your country, or you can't, because the state's looking at everything. But most of the time, the technology doesn't have that sort of 0 to 1 nature. It's more about just saying, hey, we could do this land restoration project using a traditional multi-stakeholder cooperative. That's probably it's gonna take this, it's gonna take this long and cost this much money, and probably mean that we're restricted to working or having members within that one country. Or we could set up a DAO, and it will be done, and the DAO will be set up in a couple of hours' time, and we can instantly accept members and start raising capital from people all over the world. Now, there are other projects that I could give you examples of in the refi space, but I want to emphasize again, this is in terms of refi, regenerative finance, Web3 really turning to regenerative ends. We are super early stage. But let's see if I can mention one more for you. So
before we go into the next example, maybe I misunderstood, but I'm really curious, because you said for most things, we don't need Web3 technology. I agree, yet my understanding, more through a philosophical lens is that actually DAOs, I mean, on a somewhat very metaphysical level, they could also exist, but basically the voting, the decision-making, the decoupling of ownership and voting rights, basically the whole smart contract story could be simulated, right, without a blockchain, but it's just like infinitesimally like more difficult and more costly. So I'm just curious to listen into, is it not truly that actually quite of the revolutionary potential of blockchain technology and then on the application level make the reconstruction, basically the filaments of the social architecture, suddenly very open porous for a lot of experiments happen? And sure, we don't know which will stick, but much like you said with the land registry, sure, you can simulate like a land registry in a traditional sense. But like you said, you're not just putting that on a DAO. It just makes it like, yeah, again, infinitesimally easier. So I would like to stay on that like level of discernment before then.
Okay.
You said another example.
Like first, maybe let me just clarify what. So when I said you don't need Web3, I was speaking in reference to that like letter to email example. It's like, yeah, of course, co-ops exist. You can still set up a co-op, like, you can set up a co-op before blockchain technology and still do a pretty good job at sort of regenerating land using traditional legal structures and capital raising structures. That's the context in which I said you don't need Web3. I mean, like, nowadays, would you say, well, you don't need email? Actually, it's kind of hard to say that. In lots of ways, you do need email to kind of get on in the world, and so like I think there will come a point where we say this, where we feel similarly about Web3. It's like, well, actually, no, Web3 has become like an integral part of how we coordinate, how we do business, how we transact. Clearly, we're not there yet, but we went there with email. In 1990, let's say. So I think the benefits that you were referring to in what you said afterwards were really to do with what in a DeFi world might be called like the money Legos quality of blockchains. So the fact that the output of any smart contract can be the input of another, and the whole state, all data on the blockchain is publicly visible, and the whole history of the blockchain is publicly visible to everyone, is like a massive free open API. I don't know if you or your listeners will be familiar with like an API, like say Twitter or Facebook have an API which enables. So I could write a program which like pulls data from Facebook using Facebook's API. So it enables other programs to interface with Facebook or Twitter or whatever. Basically, every major web service has an API now. But of course, and this was actually been a particularly important topic in the history of Twitter's API. Twitter can, pull the plug on their API or like arbitrarily change it or decide actually, no, you're not getting that data anymore now, or like we're changing how this is done at will. So it's our access to Twitter's or Facebook's data is kind of contingent on what's most profitable for them, whether it's profitable for them. Whereas in the case of Ethereum, it's there's no there's no board deciding, okay, well, who's going to have access to what data. All of their data is out there, transparent by default for anyone to build off and play with in a totally open way. And indeed, I think that's a very powerful quality of these systems.
Let's stay on the API level because I find that particularly interesting. I'm tech savvy enough to wanting to stay in the room there with you, because I never thought about that. So is it truly so that every application that's coded on a blockchain is like open source in the sense that the data is open and the APIs can be interlinked? Because I never linked so much like the blockchain technology to the open source movement. So maybe we stay there for a moment.
Yeah. So actually, the phrase you're looking for is open state. Yeah. I mean, and this not all blockchains have this quality, but almost all of the major and most popular blockchains have this quality that they are open state. So that means like the transactions, the kind of like the inputs and outputs, all of the smart contracts that have been processed on the blockchain are all there for anyone to see and anyone to use. Now, as well as being open state, most and basically all kind of major smart contracts running in the Ethereum ecosystem, at least, are also open source. So not only can I see all of the data that's like kind of come in and out of those contracts, I can also read the source code of those contracts to sort of understand exactly how they're working. Now, those are different things. And so actually, there's some people who've complained that in the Solana ecosystem, although they have open state, there's a lot of like major Solana smart contracts like dApps, decentralized apps, weren't publishing their code in an open source way. So it was a bit of a black box. We can see, okay, we feed in X, we get out Y, but like what exactly is this Solana dApp doing inside? So I think there is a that was mainly a kind of thing, an oversight and just people kind of like rushing to get stuff out. I think Solana is also mostly heading in an open source direction, which is very welcome. But yeah, both of these things are extremely important, and open source movement, as you sort of, I think you were getting at, has been around for some time, I mean, all of us, basically all of the technology we use every second of the day will rely in some way on open source technology and software. It's just which is incredible that it exists. Yeah, this the fact that people have provided so much quality software just available completely for free. It's a true commons in the technology commons, the commons of the modern world. But open state is something which really has only become, or has become much more significant in the context of blockchains. You could say it like Wikipedia has a kind of open state as well. Not only is the code of Wikipedia open source, so that if I want to, I can kind of download the code and start my own Wikipedia, but the data is open state. Like all of the data that's actually on Wikipedia's database is kind of like free to download in that sense. How the difference is, of course, that ultimately Wikipedia's code it exists on one or some finite number of hard drives, and in principle, those, if that set of machines was confiscated, then Wikipedia would go offline. I would say that I imagine they have pretty sophisticated like backup and resilient scheme at Wikipedia now, given how important it is to the world. But I would presume, without knowing the details of that like the Ethereum blockchain, for example, is even more probably even orders of magnitude more resilient even than Wikipedia in maintaining state in an open state.
I wonder more, should we explore when it comes to DAOs? Maybe some of the developments that you see in the space, maybe also some of the pitfalls or hurdles, because certainly in my very own ecosystem, everybody talks about them. Very few people actually use them. And so if we compare Web3 and emails to letters, right? What would make the DAO movement, spread like wildfire? How would the world look like if we were to conceive of a big fraction of citizens really using a DAO
Yeah.
and being part of different DAOs, in as much as today they're using internet or they're using like apps on a smartphone?
Yeah. So the vision there for me is a cooperative economy. So one where simply by using or purchasing goods and services, we gradually become owners of those goods and services over time. Like just because you're using Facebook doesn't mean you're starting to like have any like legal kind of financial interest in Facebook. And actually the same for like basically, just because you're buying that particular brand of shampoo doesn't mean you're getting any, interest in the shampoo company. But like, what if every time you purchase a product or a service, you were building up an ownership stake in that product or service, such that over time, the most loyal users of that service actually had like a significant say in the future of that service, and perhaps also shared in the financial rewards of that good or service if it was successful. Now, the issue with DAOs is really common to the kind of more horizontal organizations in the pre-Web3 era. It's just that democratic horizontal organizations are kind of tough to run in the way that I actually kind of mentioned in this way when I was talking about Dandelion Collective and just needing really to invest a lot of resources in conflict resolution. But these that was, of course, it was just a co-op of 8 people, but some of these DAOs are hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of members, and there it's obviously not everyone is reading and voting on every decision, or even can in principle. So the place that many DAOs are moving towards is liquid democracy. So here I would, if I thought, okay, well, I'm interested in this DAO that we're both part of, Alistair, but like I don't really have time to like keep up with like what the DAO is up to and what best decisions to make. I could delegate my vote to you, and so this is what we call delegative voting, delegative democracy. That the liquid part comes in when that delegation is transitive, I believe is the word. So that if you also, for at least for a period of time, thought, well, actually, Alistair doesn't have enough time to keep up with what's going down, then Alistair, you can delegate your vote to your friend Bob, and then now Bob's vote is worth 3. Bob's vote is worth mine because I delegated to you, and yours because you delegated to him as well as his own. Does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense. I don't know if I want to stay with that example, because if I look at the US and super PACs and all the wicked entangled problems of modern democracy.
So I'm going to point out like a key difference, like in representative democracy, which is we are only voting for our representatives every 4 or 5 years. And basically during that time, we have to just suck up everything, all the decisions that they make. At least in the UK, like there is now there is a limited recall law in the case that like there's been like serious misconduct, or the MP is like prosecuted for does some criminal act, then we can demand there to be a by-election. But in liquid democracy, like at any point in time, so say in this example, say I heard that there's a particularly controversial decision going on in this DAO, I would look up, or has happened. So the vote's already happened. So what happened there? So like I delegated my vote to Alistair. Oh, Alistair actually didn't vote himself. He had delegated to Bob. And what the fuck? Bob voted for this. Like, wow, I'm not happy with that. So it would typically require like something controversial happening for people to then pay attention to see how did my delegate vote? And then at that point, if they're not happy, they say, well, like, no, I'm not going to delegate to like Bob by Alistair anymore. I'm going to delegate to someone else who actually voted in the way that I desire. So it's a much more responsive form of representative democracy, which, I mean, like, I think it's important not to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? There's a reason why we all live in representative democracies nowadays. It's because direct democracy in a state of, in the UK's case, what's our population now? 60, 70 million is like highly impractical. So I think it's important to understand like why democracy has like got to the place that it's got to, and also now see that technology exists to allow for a much more flexible form of this. So that's the kind of direct voting direction that I'm very interested to see. I'm interested to see how it evolves in the DAO space over the coming months and years.
I feel like I want to jump a little bit and maybe get a little bit more visionary. Is when I think all of these nascent ecosystems that are redefining both the way they interact with each other through new ways of governance, but also the way they attribute a value and exchange a value. For me, one of the biggest dreams I have is what actually happens when you interlink these hyperlocal communities. Let's imagine, like a couple of thousand eco-villages, and you interlink them on a global level through a blockchain technology where they can exchange globally, but at the same time stay hyperlocal. Mm-hmm. So I can't articulate that more granular, but one of the things that I really see needs to happen, especially in the regenerative space, and I mean that in the broadest sense of the matter. So what I see in the last 50 years, like millions of NGOs, like, millions of cooperatives, and they are all the chrysalis cells, and all within their own capacities, really trying to make a difference. Many of them hyperlocal, few of them on a global level, like the biggest NGOs, like maybe like Greenpeace. So I wonder really what could be the wonder, of Web3 and blockchain technology when basically the filaments are provided by new technology, but the agency of the sum total is way more, than just what the people hyperlocally do. And there comes another layer to that. I wonder then what really could also come from exchanging the values. And so I'm really just curious. I mean, this is more like a very visionary part, but in my gut feeling, this needs to happen in over the next 5 to 10 years.
Are you familiar with Balaji Srinivasan's work on the network state?
I'm not.
No, okay. So this is a book that came out in the last few weeks. Like, it's been, people have been excited about its release for a long time, and it's generated quite a lot of discussion since. I'd say that people in the Web3 space are like broadly sympathetic to the ideas contained within it. Balaji has his own politics, which is maybe like more kind of center-right libertarian than other characters in the crypto space, including the Ethereum founder Vitalik Buterin and Glenn Weil and so on, who would be a bit more on the kind of left libertarian side of things. But like I think it's. Did
you read it? Let's stay there. I just Googled it in parallel. So
I'm reading it right now, but so just when you speak of this like a currency connecting like a network of eco villages worldwide, that's sounding quite a lot like what Balaji would call a network state. So of course, the idea of local currencies has been around for some years now. In fact, there was one in my hometown of Totnes in Devon, the Totnes pound, and in that case, it was pegged 1-to-1 with the British pound. But it, which is, I mean, any local currency that's pegged, I would suggest is, has its advantages, but is otherwise in lots of ways quite limited. But the thing it did do is mean that it helped keep money circulating within the local economy, the Totnes economy. Because if you had a bunch of Totnes pounds, unless you go to the trouble of exchanging them back to British pound, well, I can only spend these like in shops like in the vicinity here. It kind of encouraged people to spend locally, dissuaded people, created some barrier to them spending it outside of that region. Now, you could imagine some kind of local currency scheme where the same kind of local currency was used in a number of different geographically separate eco-villages, right? So this comes back to some of what I was saying. It's like, sometimes it's not that Web3 is necessarily means that the impossible becomes possible, just that it becomes a hell of a lot easier. Like I would suggest that if you wanted to set up a new currency that was like circulating in geographically dispersed eco-villages, nowadays, the obvious choice would be to reach for a blockchain, or to issue a token on a blockchain, because you just inherit all of these very useful properties, the transparency, the censorship resistance, the global by default, without needing to kind of like work those things out for yourself. So blockchains are kind of encouraging or at least have the potential to encourage the creation and circulation of these network currencies across communities of interest, rather than simply geographies. And that, I think, is extremely interesting, because more and more we are all spending much more time, we all feel much more affiliated to these geographically dispersed but like ideologically, culturally aligned tribes that exist on the internet, or like, say, through like a festival, like next week I'm going to the Borderland Festival, and like it's no doubt that I feel much greater affinity in lots of ways with the people that will go to that festival, who come from all kinds of different countries, than the people that live at least, say, 5 or 10 miles outside of my town of Totnes, which suddenly becomes like very kind of conservative blue England. So this network state is associated with this idea of community of interest, and I think, as you described, we're very likely to see more and more currencies circulating among these communities as the months and years go by.
I wonder, shall we stay? I feel like we're approaching, the end of our conversation, but I wonder, are there a couple of other exciting examples from complementary currencies, mutual credit currencies, real asset-backed currencies, or endeavors in the space that really try to, rethink them, or more like build them, but now with the technology being much more advantageous, like you were mentioning, obviously somebody could still go to a town and try to do it the same way like the Totnes pound was built. But I wonder what interesting examples in the space.
Yeah. So one project that I myself am keen to like dig into a little bit more is the Eden DAO, which is as far as I understand it, working on a carbon-backed currency. Now, I am, some of your readers perhaps will be more familiar with this idea from it being included in the book Ministry of the Future. You come across this book? For Ministry for the Future. Yeah, this is a Kim Stanley Robinson book. Kim Stanley Robinson, a very well-known science fiction author, and Ministry for the Future, I think that it starts in the year 2030 and goes up until about the kind of end of the 21st century. And it's a tale of how things more or less turned out okay in relation to the climate and ecological crisis. Like, a lot of bad shit does happen, but like we just about kind of get there and avoid the worst effects of it. And I think the fact that like there is a lot of struggle in that book makes it all the more interesting to me. It's not just like, oh, we invented this amazing technology and then everything was fine. It's one of the key plot threads in that book is eco-terrorism, of of like the imagined. It's actually a kind of terrorist group that has its genesis in India, following a deadly heat wave in India that does things like starts like blowing up private jets and so on to like dissuade people from certain forms of behavior. Now, I'm going a little bit off topic here, but it's a fascinating book with it just poses some really interesting moral dilemmas, we could say, and that's the context in which I bring up the kind of eco-terrorist piece, not because I agree with it, just because it's just it really makes you think. Anyway, part of that book also is the idea of a global carbon-backed currency issued by like a consortium of the world's top or the largest central banks, and this idea of carbon-backed, or more generally like natural capital-backed currencies, is extremely interesting to me. So, I mean, the thing is, like, currently most fiat currencies are actually, no, by definition, if we're saying fiat currencies, then are not backed by anything. Like, once upon a time, state currencies were backed by gold and silver and other precious metals. We have never tried backing a national currency with a natural resource. I mean, in a way, you can say like gold is a kind of natural resource, but like, let's say a resource of ecological importance, like carbon, and to actually use that in some way at best, such a scheme could help us to properly value the natural world. Like arguably one of the big problems we have right now is that the atmosphere is worth nothing. Like, people, you can dump as much shit into the atmosphere, certainly the air, if not the rivers and the seas, and land. Like, you can dump as much as you want into the air at basically zero cost, and no consequence. And I'm certainly interested in this argument that we, one way or another, we have to start putting it can sound uncomfortable, but in some ways, for sure, like, but I think we have to take seriously the possibility that we have to put a price on nature or ecosystem services. And it's a really interesting one, because I'm certainly sympathetic also to folks that say, you want to solve capitalism with more capitalism. Are you fucking crazy? Like, but maybe they're right. But I think at this point we have to put everything on the table, and that even if it's maybe it's more of just like a short to medium term measure, like the kind of pricing of carbon and other like ecosystem resources, before we can get to a place beyond that actually we can start to like deconstruct some of these pricing schemes.
For those that listen to the podcast, what would be a couple of recommendations at the end? So before closing words, where should people go? Where can they educate themselves?
Mm-hmm.
What is an interesting experiment they can run? Because I certainly know it's really a matter of fact that time and again, I would not consider myself a very tech savvy person, more the economist kind of guy. And I personally really still, most of the time, besides on an intellectual level, much like this conversation, I have this, this is an endeavor. I don't know, just randomly making up, I'm part of, I think, 6 nonprofit organizations, some of which are more well-known, like Greenpeace, Transparency International, then it's called Save the Rainforest, Rettet den Regenwald, stuff like that. And I, for example, would know that, I don't know, if Greenpeace shoots me an email and saying, okay, we found this now out, it's like, instead of you transferring whatever that is, 10 euros per month, to Greenpeace, we now decided to put this on a blockchain and connect all our members, and you get voting rights. And, then I would really get curious. And I actually really think all of this will happen, but more like now, right? I often have this, what is really the relevance for me as Alistair, having a very international life, but what's the relevance of like being immersed in that? Sure, I know, again, it's not, I'm not ditching this at all, but I still lack the everyday correlates to my life. So I'll give you another example. I was one of the very last ones, because I'm very extrovert, and I had already thousands of connections, and everybody was using WhatsApp, right? I didn't use it, because I kind of did not understand what, from a user perspective, for me actually would make it easier, right? And then I started to use WhatsApp, and I understood, wait, Alistair, this actually makes total sense for you as a networker and how you interact with people, and also changed really the social fabric of how I interact. Or my family set up, a joint family group. And this is actually one of the most beautiful things for us as like my bloodline, so to say, family, to stay connected and post. And this was not a question, but I wonder.
I mean, just in some way, to like go back to the beginning, which is feels strangely appropriate in some way, as we spiral upwards in our understanding of this technology and its potential. Like, let's just go back to the really basic feature of censorship resistance, right? Which has, so if you were in Cyprus in 2008, maybe it was early 2009, or sadly, if you have been in Ukraine or Russia more recently, you will have become familiar with capital controls and the way in which those states have said, you cannot withdraw this much money or from these currencies from your bank account. You cannot take currency across borders and so on. Now, solidarity with the Ukrainian people, I just to make that very clear, but like, this is clearly also like a lot of ordinary Russians, that like at least a fraction of which will be sympathetic to the Ukrainian position, who suddenly have had their lives turned upside down by sanctions and capital controls and so on, and the fact that it's in those times, if you're thinking of your family as well, when you're talking about, it's like where the state actually starts locking down bank accounts and like stopping to people moving money around, or taking money out of the country, where censorship resistant ways of transferring value become extremely practical, become extremely important. If you're fleeing Russia, and the only way you can take your money out of the country and have any money to spend to start creating a new life somewhere else is through a cryptocurrency, then it becomes like of crucial importance.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for that example. Closing words from your side? What do you feel like you want to inspire most when people leave that podcast?
Yeah, let's see. So I hope I've given people some sense of why I think this is an extremely important and powerful technology, or set of technologies that have the potential to promote freedom and sovereignty. How exactly things will turn out really depends on what kinds of people and with what kinds of values show up to the space and build with this, and what directions that we bend it. And I'm not saying it's like, oh, it's all guaranteed to be fine. Now we've got this magic technology now that's going to solve. No way. If you're someone who acknowledges that basically everything we've been doing in relation to the climate and the ecological crisis, and maybe you could maybe even say like the mental health crisis and just like the crisis of global wealth inequality, more or less everything we've been doing so far has not worked, and things are getting worse in important ways and across a number of measures in their way in those areas. If you're of that persuasion, then you probably also understand that we need to try something that's like very different to what we've tried so far. And you probably also at least have a feeling that, okay, this technology is pretty different. This is something new. And you may not yet be persuaded that or see clearly how it's the answer. And that's okay, because I certainly don't always either. That's not like the place that I'm assuming people have got to through this conversation. But if listeners have become interested enough to think, okay, there could be something here in this technology, then I would suggest, take the time to educate yourself with a little bit more. And the more of us that can find with these kind of aligned values, seeking to use the technology for the good of people and planet, if we can find one another, then perhaps we can find ways to use this technology for something really, really important in the months and years ahead. So the main place that I would point people to is the emerging refi movement. So let me just get the web address right. This is so there's refidao.com, and there's a bunch of now there's a whole load of Telegram groups sprung up. I don't actually see a link to the Telegram. Maybe it's at the bottom of the page. No, I don't even see it there. Anyway, we'll make sure the links to the Telegram groups are in the show notes.
Let's add this to the library.
Sure,
once we close the conversation.
There's actually there's a kind of a global refi group. There's like refi groups in various different countries, and there's a group for refi spring. So for I think mostly targeted at next spring, but even before then, there's a group intending to have mostly real life events on gatherings about refi and the potential of this technology happening all over the globe. So I'm actually contributing to the Refi Spring website, which will be launched over the next couple of weeks, and encouraging people to check that out and maybe find a real life event near you and just meet some interesting people in real life.
Thanks so much, Stephen, for the conversation.
It's been a pleasure. Take care.
Thanks.